Hello, Prime Media, Prime Log audiences, both in Ethiopia and the diaspora. Thank you for tuning in again. I am your host, Ladette Muleta. I'm here today with a special guest. Her name is Carol Pineau. I'm really honored to have her here today, joining us on Prime Log. She has a vast experience in working in Africa. I'll give her the chance to please introduce herself and tell us her background. Thank you, Carol, for joining us. Please.
Oh, well, Linda, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. So I'm a journalist and I've worked on Africa for more than 20 years. I had been a reporter in Nairobi covering the 12 East African nations, and then in Eritrea covering the Eritrean-Ethiopian conflict and Eastern Liberated Sudan. And since then, I got tired of telling the story of wars and famines, and I decided to do something different. And so I did my own documentary called Africa Open for Business. That I joke this was the first time anyone had ever seen Africans being perfectly normal. It was just 10 stories of entrepreneurship, which should have been rather boring, but because people had never seen that in Africa, it became a big deal and it was voted the BBC documentary of the year. And then it ended up influencing a lot of other media, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, others too, to start writing more about business in Africa and just show a more balanced view of what is the continent.
That's amazing and impressive. What made you want to do something different than the usual? I mean, it seems like Africa is really known, like you mentioned, for famine and wars, and I wish there was a lot of exposure for the great things that happen in Africa as well. But I'm very happy that I have found you, and to know that there are people who are very passionate about sharing the positive side of Africa. So, what made you want to take on that task?
So it was in 2005 when the film came out. So it really was before anyone was thinking about, a different image, and everybody thought it was a crazy idea. My friends in the media said, this is business, this is Africa, like no one is going to watch it. It's going to be incredibly boring. But I think that it was just such a surprise to people to see that. And for me personally, I had been sort of the typical Western journalist when I lived in Nairobi. I think now we call it the white savior. I thought I was giving Africans voice because surely they don't have a voice unless I'm there, right? So, but it wasn't until I moved to Eritrea. And I always say that moving to Eritrea, there's something so forceful about them and so honest that I always say that it's like they grab you by the shirt collar and say, don't come in here telling us what's Africa. We will tell you what's Africa. And I really learned a very different vision of what was Africa and started to really question things and look at aid very differently, the whole development structure very differently, the whole Western view of how, we have to be speaking for them. We have to bring in a celebrity who has nothing to do with Africa, except they got bad ratings in something or did some scandal. And then they have to come in and hold a bunch of African babies to look better. You start seeing these things. You start seeing that the good guys, they're not really so good. And the ones that we're told are the bad guys, they're not really so bad. So it just got me questioning things. And as a journalist, you always want to tell the story that's not been told. And there it was, the most important story that was right out there for everybody to see. And instead of reporting on it, we drive right past the normal Africa to take a charter flight up to some cholera-infested refugee camp. And when we get there, we go to the one place within the camp where children will have about 24 hours to live unless they have an intervention. And that's what we'd film. And that's all that we'd film. And that was Africa. That's not Africa. That's a little tiny, that's not even the whole refugee camp. It's a little tiny part. So yes, it's a reality, but it's not the reality. The reality is a multidimensional picture. So that's really what I wanted to do and what I have been doing since then.
Wow, I had to kind of take a moment for that because sometimes, as an Ethiopian American, I wonder, if the top medias are doing enough to really bring in, whether it's business, whether it's peace, whether it's inclusiveness, and then at the same time, encouraging and not dismissive or disrespectful to some countries, because you just wonder every time you go through BBC, it's almost like, a lot of it is very negative. So you directed Africa Open for Business and produced it. You made the film to obviously make the impact. Did it make the impact that you expected? Where did it, go above and beyond your expectations? And is there any plans for you to push it more? Where are you with that documentary?
It went way beyond my expectations. This started out as just a little thing. We were going to get some case studies and kind of get some footage and bring it back to, I was at CNN at the time, reporting for the Inside Africa show. We'd bring it back and show them. They'd say, oh, maybe we'll do a story, right? I thought that's as much as we'd get. And I went for the first trip. The World Bank had funded it. None of these businesses are involved with the World Bank. They just funded it as a journalistic project. And I came back and I said, this is a documentary. We have to do this. And so they funded the full documentary. And honestly, I am shocked at how much it did. I think because it was really the first thing out there like that. It also came out the year that the African Union had declared that we had to start changing, rebranding Africa's image. And so I think there was a growing realization of how much this costs Africa. And I think that's still a really important issue, that when you look at things like risk calculation, every single investment that is made in Africa, there is a premium on it. The Africans have to pay much higher rates to get money. They have to give out much higher rates on projects because there is a perception of risk. And so, I've continued to do stories. I don't think anything, it's no longer as new of a story. So I don't know if anything will ever be that like that. But it was one of those things that I was really proud of to have contributed to changing that narrative to a more fair and balanced narrative.
That takes me to our topic of, media. Right now, as you know, Ethiopia is going through a transitional government, and we recently had law enforcement operation in Ethiopia, and Ethiopia is currently on the media constantly. Constantly. It's like, I can't keep up with the amount of articles that's coming out. And it amazes me. In one case, it's great to see that there's concern about Ethiopia. And then obviously there are innocent civilians who do get affected anytime there's a conflict in any country, especially when the conflict happens with government and a very powerful previous leadership. It's almost just as powerful as the government. So there's, a lot of issues. And then there's also the involvement of Eritrea that's also being covered in the media. And in one hand, I'm happy to know that, the world gets to hear about Ethiopia, but I am very much sad, I should say, that it's getting the kind of coverage for negative things and not for positive things. One of the other things that recently we have found is several media outlets had to apologize for the footage that they were using, because diaspora, both Ethiopian and Eritrean diasporas, had to reach out, including embassies, had to reach out for the information they were using. They were using information from 2018 as today. They were also using pictures from previous 2000 conflict between Ethiopia and Eritrea as a current picture. And I mean, several unverified information, even questions about how you interview people, like you just said, about going to refugee camps and how you interview, verify, are the information verifiable? You know, do we have people? And then there's also been information out, videos out when people were being trained to report to media while media is there, and they're trying to increase the casualties. Well, no, 42 doesn't sound well. Make it 182 and make it. I mean, it's shocking as someone who has no experience in journalism myself, and part of the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing right now voluntarily is because this really affects countries. This affects relationship of people, because a certain group is feeling victimized, and certain groups are being called the abusers, and it's not just causing policy problems, but it's causing people to people relationship. And I told you already, I'm in public health profession, and I mean, I really believe in ethics. The ethics is very important when you know that people's lives depend on it. And I was shocked to see that these type of things happen in the media world. What do you have to say about that?
Wow, you've given me a lot to unpack there. So, I think if we can step back from the Ethiopia part of it and just look at the structure of how news is gathered, you start to see why these things happen. Because I know that there are a lot of people within the Ethiopia and Eritreans who call me and say, like, sort of, does the media have it out for Ethiopia, for Eritrea? And, there, of course, are prejudices that people have. But I think that the real culprit here is the way that news is gathered. And so, first of all, when you're a journalist, you are under pressure. You have 24-hour news cycles. It never, ever sleeps. There is an expression that you have to feed the beast. And you have to constantly feed the beast because the beast needs more news. So you're constantly wanting something new, and really taking the time to check into something and really understand it, that's not really valued. What's valued is, I was 16 seconds ahead of Reuters. That literally will get you an email from your CEO. And, that's the kind of thing that matters. No one can really be working on accuracy when you're looking at being 16 seconds ahead of the competition. So there's that, first of all. But the other part, and I used to say this in Eritrea all the time when they would say, oh my God, how could that journalist be so stupid as to report that? Do you realize how impossible it is in warfare? This cannot happen with this. And I would explain to them, we're all just nice kids from the suburbs. We don't really know war. We're called war correspondents, but we're really just nice kids from the suburbs. Maybe I had like a fight with somebody in elementary school. That's the closest I ever got to war before that. So I don't understand about, the no man's land and about mines and stuff like that. You start learning it as you do it. But it is really, really easy to fool somebody when they don't have that kind of background. Now, add to that you have language issues. So you come into a country, you, as we call it, parachute in. So you just, you fly in, and all of a sudden there you are in the country, and you're supposed to be on in a couple hours. So you go, you come out of the airport and you find some taxi driver. If you don't have a bureau there, you find a taxi driver and you say, okay, can I hire you for the day? How much? Great. You speak English. You can translate for me. Great. You don't actually know what that taxi driver's politics are. And, even if you have a fixer that your office has, have you really investigated what their politics are. Are they on the side, as they're translating, are they translating honestly? And then you can check it with somebody, you can verify, but do you know that person's politics? And it just goes on and on. So there was a time when I had a friend who had been in the Peace Corps. He spoke Tigrinya fluently. No one knew because he was a white guy with, red hair. Like no one would have thought that he was a Tigrinya speaker. I went with him to do a couple of things with, at the time, the Ethiopian ambassador or the chargé who was at the embassy in Asmara, and went around with him. And we never told him that my friend spoke Tigrinya or understood Tigray. And he went around, he would translate, the ambassador, the chargé would translate things for me. And my friend would write me notes saying like, that's an absolute lie. If I hadn't had my friend there, I would have had, somebody else who would have said, oh, yes, he said this. And I go, oh, yeah, There's really no way to verify this stuff. And so there's an element of trust. And at times, we can really be hoodwinked. And I think that then gets into my last point, that I think that when we come in, there is an arrogance of Western media. Which I know might be news for you, but yes. But there's an arrogance that we don't believe that, these are simple people. These are nomads. They're simple. And so they couldn't possibly have the wherewithal to do like an organized fooling of everybody. And I remember I would go in Southern Sudan, every single person during the whole, problems there. And they would talk about, the Janjaweed. The Janjaweed could come at 2:00 in the morning and they burned down my hut. And I would joke with other journalists, like, always 2 a.m.? Like, do they not work during the day? Do they not work at 3 a.m.? Is there no other time? But our assumption was these people are too simple-minded to possibly be able to fool us. And later when I told that to an African, he laughed and said, you're such an idiot. So we just don't believe that, we're so smart. We're so sophisticated. They couldn't possibly be able to fool us. They actually can do that. So I think when journalists come in, there isn't the same kind of suspicion when things start to look like that. You don't listen to your translator and go, I don't know if this guy's telling me the truth. You don't listen to somebody telling you a terrible story about all this torture and everything. And it just seems so cold and, mean to say to them, I don't know if I believe you, right? So you just go, what a terrible thing. You write it out and all of a sudden you're harming lives because you've told things that aren't true, but you had no idea. So I think there's a lot of sort of coming in with arrogance, but good faith. And that a lot more mistakes are made than people realize.
It's very unfortunate, Carol, because I did not, realize the amount of impact that that journalists can make. And another thing that has been discovered, or that is conflict of interest. I did not know. I'm not sure if it's a requirement within the journalist world, but what Ethiopian Americans and Eritrean Americans are finding out is that there are a lot of journalists and people who work in human rights organizations who are working with conflict of interest, people who are either family members, extended family members of known political figures, and supporters. They are supporters of a certain group, and they promote a certain agenda and propaganda, and they are freely, putting out news that is totally biased and very clear to see. And how do you, what is your advice for people who feel misrepresented, for people who feel, yes, great, it's unfortunate that that Ethiopians are going through some difficult times, or any other African country, for this matter, could have conflicts, could have issues. But we want a peaceful existence. We want our country to progress. We want peace for our country. We don't want to fight amongst each other. We don't want to fight with our neighbors. If we have done those things in the past, we don't want to do those things in the year 2021 and moving forward. And to have these instigation and instigators that will continue to further push certain minds into that, towards that road, we want to fight back. What are the ways to fight back these kind of biased, unverified? Just to remind you, I'm sure you probably are aware, Eritrean and Ethiopian community in the diaspora have had peaceful demonstrations out in media outlets, and in Washington, D.C., New York, and Atlanta, and several U.S. cities, trying to fight this issue. What are some other ways that you think, since you've been on the other side, that you feel will be fruitful and at least making our voice known that this matters to us? And as Americans, we would like our voice heard about this matter.
It's a really, really good question, and I wish I had an equally good answer. I'm not sure that I do. It's really, really difficult. I think, stepping back from journalism, one of the things that I think really is really interesting is this thing of how we build up regimes, governments, and we say that this leader, this country, they become the darling of the World Bank. Everybody loves them. You had the whole African Renaissance. Oh, they were the best leaders. And all of a sudden, then we trash them. And they never were as great as we said they were, and they're never as bad as we say they are. But there's something of this sort of, flying way up and then way down that we do with African leaders. And it's the delegitimizing of African governments that is a really serious issue. Because at the end of the day, who is going to move a country forward except for a government? So, if you're going to delegitimize an entity, that's the worst one to delegitimize. But there's something about that where we've also delegitimized the voices of Africans when they complain about it. If you complain to a media outlet, well, that's because you're biased. What if you're actually telling the truth? What if they're wrong and you're telling the truth? But you get into this thing, and I'm struck by the fact that when you look at these leaders that are then delegitimized, and we call them pariah nations, what can a pariah nation ever, a classified pariah nation, ever do to get out of that? Once you're labeled that, there's nothing you can ever say or do. Whatever you do, it's corrupt, it's not legitimate, there's no way out of it. And I think that we've sort of done the same thing with a lot of African voices in America, that we've delegitimized it to a point where there's nothing that you can say that then seems legitimate. You're just, it's an ethnic issue and you're on that side. Or, it couldn't possibly be that you actually are talking about truth. And there's an issue within the media a lot of times. We don't really accept or believe. I have a friend that we argued about this earlier. Is it that we don't accept or we don't believe? He says, you guys believe it, you just don't accept it. But we don't believe that there is real geopolitics in Africa. Again, this gets back to how it must be simple. So they couldn't have geopolitics. And so there's a thing in the media where we believe that if one side hates you and the other side hates you, you must be telling the truth because both sides hate you. It's beyond them to realize there could also be a third side. So I saw this when I was at Voice of America, and one side of the Eritrean Ethiopian conflict hated us and the other side hated us. And so the editors all said, we're telling the truth. No, actually, there was a third side and there was no truth being told at all. So, you know, how you break through that, I'm not sure. I think that one thing I will say is that I hear a lot of sort of rhetoric that I don't think is helpful to your cause. That if you're going to be sort of up in arms and emotional and upset about it, people then just discount what you say. If you go in and say, you know, look at, you know, whatever news media, I know you meant well. I know you wanted to show human rights abuses, which are important to show, but you didn't actually get this story right. And let me tell you the facts of why. And let me explain to you why. And you do this, you know, in a very sort of calm way. Maybe there's a chance, you know, but what we would get instead, you know, I used to joke that, you know, you would see come at the time we had fax machines, come over the fax machine, you know, press release after press release. And after a while in the newsroom, you really don't care whether there's a star or a camel at the top. You just discount it and go, oh, forget it. You know, it's just that border war. But what if there's truth in it, you know? And these would be like 5, 6, 10-page faxes. You don't write a press release that long. That's hysteria. This is the thing of, I think it's not really doing your argument any favors to do that. And I think really thinking about this in a strategic way of sort of taking it slowly, explaining it like sort of like children, you know, these are the things. And then I think maybe the only other thing I can think of, you know, we've had quite a reckoning in the U.S. with Black Lives Matter. Have we really had a reckoning of how we talk about Black lives outside of the U.S.? And so we talk about it in one way within the US, and we all say, you know, oh, we have to be woke. Does woke include how we talk about Africa? And maybe to pitch it in that way. You know, I know you mean well, but you're actually saying things that are really prejudicial, and you're showing your biases there. Yeah. The last thing I'll say is I am very, very against anybody talking about telling good news stories on Africa. And people are saying, you tell these. No, I don't. I never tell good news stories. I tell facts. And they're just simply facts. When the New York Stock Exchange does incredibly well and hits record highs, is that a positive story about America or just a fact? The issue is that we don't tell the story of Africa in a multidimensional way. So if we told the story of the US in the way we tell the story of Africa, where we delegitimize the government and we talk about all the negatives and we talk about school shootings and, you know, what happened in different places with shootings and bombs and, you know, the Capitol riots and all these things, no one would ever want to come here. No one would want to do business here. We tell a three-dimensional story. In Africa, we tell a one-dimensional story, a caricature of what Africa is. And what we need to do, and what I think you need to push the media on, it's not about telling good news story, because that's not the business of the media. That's the business of a publicist, and they don't care. So if you tell them you didn't tell a good news story, so what? You know, if you tell them you are biased, you are telling a lie by omission, that matters. And that's something that they will strive to change.
Excellent advice, Carol. I think we have to definitely be less emotional. I think the Ethiopian and Eritrean Americans are you know, learning, and at the same time, they're doing much better in a sense of trying to figure out what's you know, fruitful. As you know, one of the problems, like you said, it's not just about, you know, losing business and losing tourism. It's about, you know, having some serious image issues, policies that will affect, you know, millions of Africans. And unfortunately, like you mentioned, you know, not everything that's reported is, you know, is false, or we're not saying not everything is reported is true. But whether we like it or not, these media reports are influencing policymakers. It's influencing the rest of the world. Like you said, I mean, if we just talked about what happened today in the US and we focused on the negative things, I doubt, that people would want to visit, like you said. So I think you've raised very interesting points about, sort of, equating Black Lives Matters for Africa and so forth. I think there's already a lot of movements, a lot of talks in the African countries and here in the diaspora. I have seen about that. There's a lot of frustration in this topic, and this doesn't stop just in Ethiopia or Eritrea. It goes throughout Africa. So it's definitely a very interesting and a very early stage that we're in, and whether it could be something that my generation is going to be focused on. And I'm happy to know that there are champions like you, who advocate for Africa. And really, this is how change is made in the world. It's we are global citizens, and we need each other in order to make a great impact in this world. And I really appreciate that you work in this area and you have contributed already. And I have no doubt that you're going to be contributing more. I don't know if we have much time, but I think we're running out of time. I would give you 1 minute to say, what you would hope for the current situation that we see in the Eastern Africa, not just in Ethiopia, but Eritrea and so forth. How can the media world and policymakers and students, and maybe, because you have spent time with students as well, what is something that we can do at college level? I think college level is very important. I remember I was at University of Cincinnati going to my first march that I thought I should participate in, and I think that's a time.
What was it on?
It was on Iraq.
Ah.
It was actually the speech that the president at that time came to Cincinnati to actually make the speech to say that we were going to Iraq, and I joined college mates in protesting. And actually, that reminds me, that was actually the time that I first learned about media, because we had a lot of people come to that protest, and I'm talking about people from Columbus, from Michigan, from Kentucky, all these universities from all over. It's sort of a tri-state area. So, and it was tons of people. And then, of course, I saw at the end, at the evening, because it was a dinner event at the big museum in Cincinnati. And once it got late, once the protest was pretty much over, there were a group of hippies, like maybe 10, 15 hippies, right? And I got home, I got home with an excitement, like this is my first protest that I, participated in. Oh my God, I can't wait until I watch the news, because Cincinnati doesn't have a lot going on. So this gotta be the biggest thing on the news. And to my surprise, the only thing that was on the news was these 10 hippies.
Yep.
Who were dancing like they were in one of those parties, and did not look like they came for a cause, while we were there passionately protesting, and it was people from all walks of life. So that's my first experience, and I think it's a very important time to capture young people, because that was when I first understood my rights and the importance of civic engagement. So, what do you suggest? How should we reach out?
Oh, I think you brought up something really important. I do think it, there is an element that we forget about how important students are. And I think particularly now, I think the generation that is starting college now is so much more accepting and aware of things. I have an 18-year-old daughter who, she talks to me like I am just the oldest fogey in the world that, don't you realize these people need support and these people and these people? Like, oh my God, how many people out there? But they're more willing to see the sort of the needs of others. And it's really a priority for this generation. And I think that gives me so much hope. Um, I think that they're a lot more willing to look at institutions like the media and question them, which is another thing that gives me hope. Uh, and I think there's just a sort of excitement about exploring the world and seeing that. I've actually, I'm still reporting. I have a podcast that I'm working on. Just finished one for foreign policy on infrastructure in Africa. But right now I'm also doing, I became affiliated with George Mason University, and I've been running some virtual study abroad, and I did an in-country study abroad in Eritrea, one of the first to Eritrea. And it was just incredible to see these students and to see something, such a different development concept, and how Africans see development, how they see security, how they understand all of these things. Security is not, human rights are not just about the Geneva Conventions. It's also the right to eat, the right to, be able to sleep and be safe that night, and things like that, that we just don't, we sort of look at human rights in terms of an individual, but not in terms of a group. And it's a very interesting thing to see how Africans see it. And so I'm doing other study abroads. I don't know if you can put the the link on in virtual, so anyone can join, whether they're anywhere in the U.S. or even in Ethiopia. I'd love it. But really looking at policy development and what happens when an African country doesn't rely on the West and really starts looking at their own resources. And I think that's a lot of what's happening in Ethiopia right now, and a lot of what's threatening to the West to see that happening. I'm very encouraged when I see it, but I'm not sure everyone in the West is as encouraged.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Carol. I mean, it's so informational, and you have definitely shared great information with us, and I really appreciate you taking your time from your busy time to share your time with me and the audience in Ethiopia and in the diaspora. We really appreciate your time, and I will definitely keep in touch, and I will be reaching out for one thing or another. I'm really honored to meet you, and hope to invite you again sometime in the future with hopefully some progress.
Well, that would be great. And thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad that you're doing this show. This is a great thing. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to engaging with you in the future.
Thank you.